After 43 years, the Tron franchise has finally reached enough installments to be called a trilogy, and what a stylistically varied, narratively disconnected trilogy it is. Besides the very concept of a man getting scanned into a video game world, the only memorable thing about the original, its groundbreaking special effects, were disqualified from being nominated for the appropriate Academy Award because the use of computers to generate said effects were considered cheating. That might go to show just how groundbreaking their methods were, but that doesn't mean the effects aren't now very dated. Less than 20 minutes of Tron is even made up of computer-generated imagery, most of the bizarre glowing visuals that make up the video game world known as the Grid, created through black and white live-action footage being segmented and meticulously backlit, frame by frame, by additional layers of colour. With famous artists like Mobius and Sid Mead coming in to design the Grid, the latter having also worked on the original Blade Runner that released the same year, you can't say Tron didn't have a unique aesthetic. It's just one that doesn't hold up nearly as well as Blade Runner. The same goes for how each project explored their sci-fi stories, which is to say that Tron may have been a pioneer, but it didn't explore its potential themes very deeply or make for a particularly entertaining film narrative. The rudimentary CGI, experimental visuals, and extremely stiff performances make this feel like a student film or a YouTube skit about Jeff Bridges being trapped in a digital world and making his way back to the real world through some computer gobbledygook that barely makes sense now and would have made even less sense to anyone in 1982, at which point it was deemed necessary to explicitly differentiate the digital world from the real world with on-screen text that reads, "Meanwhile, in the real world." It's vaguely touching on how biological consciousness and digital consciousness may merge and affect each other, but any solid, philosophically or emotionally compelling components of the relationship between the real world and the computer world, or between users and programs, who are basically AI copies of their respective users, are as shallow and confusing as Tron being chosen as the title of the film. To computer nerds, a piece of programming terminology, to the film's story, a security program character who helps Jeff Bridges succeed against Master Control, and to everyone else, a word that may have sounded futuristic back then and sounds retro now because of its association with the Tron aesthetic. It's like if Morpheus was the title of that famous Keanu Reeves movie instead of The Matrix. Tron may have been a visually unique, effects-driven adventurization of ideas that had already been floating around in fiction, but a Star Wars-level success it did not turn out to be for Disney at a time when they were struggling financially. However, those effects that can be remembered fondly as an awkward prototype of what CGI would become, as well as the vague nerdiness of the concept that rapidly became more and more retro as the video game industry evolved, gave Tron its own cult classic pocket in pop culture. Quite a while later, in the 2000s, it's easy to imagine Disney looking through their collection of dormant intellectual property, looking for something to revive and boost the brand awareness of, and hopefully make some box office money along the way, as all movie studios tend to do, until deciding on making a very late sequel to that weird flop from the 80s. A sequel that would, in 2010, go on to be called Tron Legacy, in a genre of sequels that film critic Matt Singer is credited with naming the Legacy sequel, a sequel basically intending to use the built-in audience of something old, like Star Wars, Top Gun or Ghostbusters, to launch a new franchise with new faces for a new generation. Tron Legacy starts out promising, with some sleek David Fincher-esque cinematography and cranking up Daft Punk's soundtrack, which you will increasingly understand to be central to the film's identity, by far its most celebrated and culturally enduring quality. The reveal of the de-aged Jeff Bridges, however, instantly brings one's expectations down a couple of notches. This may have been Legacy's equivalent of playing around with new special effects technology as the original Tron had done, but it was coming out a year after James Cameron's Avatar and wasn't even the first attempt at the idea. De-aging still struggles to be convincing today, but this doesn't even really look like Jeff Bridges, a man who has noted the irony of being scanned into a computer and whose face I've already always thought to have something uncanny valley about it, though that may very well be a result of this de-aged face being a prominent memory of him. They could get away with this poor first impression being confined to disturbing the emotions of this opening scene, but unfortunately that confinement isn't the case, and the unconvincing de-aging shows up quite a bit for the rest of the film.
Am I still to create the perfect system? Yeah.
Jeff Bridges disappears from the real world, and his son, Sam Flynn, grows up without him to be a rebellious but boring audience insert who sabotages the greedy executives he's allowing to run his father's company, investigates his father's old arcade after Alan Bradley from the original film received a mysterious message on his pager, and in a secret office inside the arcade gets scanned into the world of the grid, where he is of course forced to play its deadly games, which are being run by the evil doppelganger of Jeff Bridges called Clue. Clue just outright reveals he's not Flynn's real dad and that he's evil upon their meeting. Not that the de-aging would have convinced any viewers that this is the real Jeff Bridges. Conversely, it does help the suspension of disbelief a little bit that this essentially being the video game Jeff Bridges explains why he looks artificial like that, even if it's confusing that Jeff Bridges also looks like that in the real world at the start of the film. Jeff Bridges has been hiding to keep his disc safe, which would act as a key, allowing Clue to exit the portal to the real world that was just reopened with Flynn's arrival. Some flashbacks exposit what went down 1,000 years ago to lead to this stalemate. Jeff Bridges created the program Clue as his partner to develop the perfect system, and in the pursuit of fulfilling that vague purpose, Clue betrayed Jeff Bridges and took over the grid, including wiping out a race of programs, which Olivia Wilde is the last survivor of, that emerged naturally, with potential beyond programmable limits, that Jeff Bridges saw as the true future. Clue wants to leave the grid to perfect the real world as well. As far as sci-fi philosophizing, this seeing the beauty of imperfection that Jeff Bridges represents in the battle against his AI counterpart is about as deep as the film's sci-fi plot gets, preferring, probably to its blockbuster benefit, to focus on the emotions involved in its father-son relationship, with Olivia Wilde as this side character representing the digital half of Jeff Bridges' legacy, who acts as the manic pixie dream girl at a time when the film industry was at the height of its manic pixie dream girl era.
Do you know Jules Verne?
Sure.
What's he like?
The problem here is that the plot and characters are so basic, portrayed through such generic blockbuster dialogue in a shallow world, that they aren't compelling enough to give the story an emotional core in support of that humanistic message. These quieter moments of character development are actually rather dull as a result, coming across as poorly paced cutscenes in between video game action that frankly also leaves a lot to be desired outside of the first disc battle and bike race scenes Flynn partakes in. The soundtrack for the original Tron by electronic pioneer Wendy Carlos never caught on culturally in the same way the aesthetic did, or Daft Punk's work on Tron Legacy has done, and it's easy to hear why. As should come as no surprise, Daft Punk's soundtrack offers some catchy electronic beats that fit Legacy's shiny reimagining of the grid, albeit it doesn't always have the smoothest integration in various scenes, feeling a bit slapped on top. What did surprise people though, coming from the bizarre style of the original Tron, was that both of these things, the sound and the visuals, were a step above what was and still is expected from a blockbuster, with the electronic orchestral music functioning as a component of film storytelling instead of just being a few catchy beats, and the visuals offering some stylistic flair instead of just being generic. Having said that, I don't really find the aesthetic of black shiny surfaces, black rocky surfaces, random pools of water, bright neon lights, and lens flares that interesting in the first place. It's very samey and often quite messy in spite of its architectural minimalism, and full of what would now colloquially be referred to as aura farming. However, the world of Tron doesn't offer much room for creativity or at least variety in the film's favour. A shallow idea of what a digital universe would look like or how it would function, stuck in the past of what people's video game expectations were during the arcade era the original takes place in. At the same time, I totally understand that this whole vibe is the selling point that makes the franchise work for so many people as a distinct thing instead of turning into Ready Player One or something. The climax involves this trio trying to stop Clue whilst fighting a painfully shoehorned appearance from Tron.
Tron, what have you become?
He snaps out of this mind state and saves the trio right at the end of the action sequence, and there's really nothing more to him than that.
I fight for the users.
Right outside the portal, Jeff Bridges explains his whole character development in an attempt to get through to Clue.
You wouldn't know that because I did when I created you.
Clue rejects him with a kick to the balls and desperately tries to hitch a ride with Flynn and Olivia Wilde escaping through the portal, but Jeff Bridges uses his magic powers to absorb Clue and explode. With the original Tron having come out so long previously and never surpassed cult movie status, Tron Legacy had a lot more freedom to expand on the idea and the world of the grid, and ended up producing a safe and functional blockbuster fans would be satisfied with. The visuals deliver exactly what I think most people would expect a modernized grid would look like, and the soundtrack exists on a higher enough tier from everything else that the common joke accompanying the film is that it's just a very long, very expensive music video for a Daft Punk album. The only real advantage the original film has over Legacy is that it feels genuinely subversive and visionary of its time, not just visually, but narratively contemplating the battle between creativity and corporations. Themes it would be extremely ironic for Disney to platform today. It just didn't remotely pull off its vision well enough to hold up as well as Legacy has so far managed to in the 15 years since its release. So far, Tron Ares is the least successful Tron movie. The other two might not have made that much money, but they did at least make their budgets back compared to Ares turning out to be a full-on box office bomb. Everyone predicted this, whether because they understood Tron to be a niche concept that acquires a cult following in the years following a release, or because nobody attached to the project, behind or in front of the camera, set high expectations that it would be good. It's coming out at a weird time in the industry and much later than a Tron sequel was intended following Legacy, at which point Disney compared their new box office goldmines of Star Wars and the MCU with the risky experimentation of such bombs as The Lone Ranger, John Carter, and Tomorrowland, and decided that risking a Tron sequel was unnecessary. Right now, while still trying desperately to milk the MCU by bringing back Robert Downey Jr. for a make-it-or-break-it Avengers movie, and whilst falling back on the emergency box office button of remaking their own animated classics in live action, Disney feels the need to throw some money somewhere else to see if it sticks, and one of those places has turned out to be finally going through with the Tron sequel that has been stuck in development hell for the past decade.
You can be honest here, this is all AI.
No, it's not. There's no AI. You're the AI.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I mean, all in all,
it was important for me to take the Tron universe visually to the next level.
There you are, completely lit up on one of these sets and just, wow.
Had this sequel shortly followed Legacy, riding the momentum by properly continuing the story with the same characters and director, which Ares has not done, then maybe it would have been successful enough that they actually had a franchise on their hands.
Change of plans.
I suspect the Tron concept is just too niche to ever be half as big as Star Wars like they have dreamed, at least not without branching out, and in so doing losing a lot of what the dedicated fans like about it, with spending almost $200 million on making a sequel 15 years later that is only loosely tied to anything preceding it, and starring an actor you can't convince me anyone believed would work in the leading role. Well, clearly they didn't really care about making any box office profit, and this is all likely just one big ad for the Tron brand, for them to boost awareness of an overpriced theme park ride, or merchandise, or a future video game tie-in or something. Nor do I think Disney is as interested in experimenting as they were with the original Tron, or in a new franchise as they were with Legacy. It's easier just to buy up as much of their box office competition as they're allowed to, so that leaves Ares in this very cynical, very boring position of just being a big pile of money dumped on another mediocre blockbuster that will make what is likely no significant impact on the industry and might manage to scrape up enough of a cult following to see another installment in another 15 years. Completely ordinary human man Jared Leto is the marketed main character of Tron Ares, but as you find out from actually watching the film, he kind of shares that with Greta Lee and Evan Peters. Leto plays the action hero who switches sides from Evan Peters as the evil billionaire to Greta Lee as the not evil billionaire, whilst learning what it is to be human or whatever. And some other even less substantive characters pop up to fill in some scenes a bit more along the way. There's barely anything more worth explaining than that, because this film is so devoid of interesting character or plot development, even in comparison to the already mediocre Tron Legacy, and the generic plasticky way the grid is presented in Ares will really make you appreciate the craftsmanship with which it was presented in Legacy. Large portions of Ares and the action sequences don't even take place on the grid, as the competing billionaires have found a way to 3D print programs and objects from the grid into the real world. Not that anything taking place in the real world feels any less like an empty and unresponsive open world video game than the grid. The plot revolves around what is basically an arms race to find the key to those printed objects, lasting more than 29 minutes. When the good billionaire who likes to print trees finds the key, the bad billionaire who likes to print weapons sends Jared Leto after her in what is basically a shitty speedrun of the first two Terminator movies. None of the action is particularly good. In fact, only the real-world bike chase about 30 minutes into the film is any good at all, and all of the hand-to-hand combat feels sluggish and uninspired. By the end, the evil billionaire has been defeated and enters the grid to become a reference to the original Tron. The character Tron, by the way, doesn't show up at all, and Jared Leto, with the help of the Jedi ghost of Jeff Bridges, achieves permanence in the real world and goes to search for Olivia Wilde, who everybody watching definitely cares to see the continued story of more than Leto's character, should an unlikely sequel actually occur. As is, any vague themes that might be there are likely an accidental discharge of trying to produce the safest, most conventional blockbuster movie possible. Given such lacking material to work with, the only slightly unique bit of spice the marketing teams had at their disposal is that the soundtrack has been composed by 9 Inch Nails.
9 Inch Nails, man.
And that is still a repeat of something people like about Legacy, attempting to recapture the popularity of Daft Punk's score and only getting away with it because 9 Inch Nails managed to meet the relatively tame expectations. Evidently, going to the cinema to watch a glorified 9 Inch Nails music video, which is more niche and less fitting than how well Daft Punk complemented the Tron universe, wasn't an enticing enough selling point. No matter what other theme park ride promotional purpose Ares serves, Tron continues to be a failed franchise, destined to be overrated and regurgitated again in a decade or two.